So Frank teaches DevOps. All right, my lovely viewers. So today we will be talking about how to add IAM users to your EKS cluster. Now you know very well, very vividly well that that the user that creates an EKS cluster, that is the user that has the authorization, all right, that has the authorization to use the cluster, right? Now let's say for instance, now i I have a user. This is a user. I have a user, all right. Then somewhere I have an EKS cluster. EKS cluster. Okay, let me say I have a user. Now this user creates this cluster. It means that this user has the authority. This user has the authority over what? Over this cluster. Now, that goes to say that if I now create other users, let me call this other user, let me call it user 1. Copy and paste. User 2. All of these are IAM user 1 and IAM user 2. All right. So this user, you want to grant this user access to this cluster. You want to grant them what? Access to this cluster. Because of this user, these users are not the original users that created this cluster. Hence, this user will not be able to have access. You won't be able to have access. They won't be able to have access to this cluster. However, in as much as they were not the original users that created the cluster, you still want to grant them access so that in a situation where this user is not available, that's the user who created the cluster, then these users should be able, all right, to what? These users should be able to have authority. These guys should be able to have authority over the cluster. So that is what we want to what? Demonstrate, right? Now this is the illustration. Then let me use real-time users to illustrate this stuff. Now look at this now. I have Omero user. Omero user, which is what I have here. Omero user created this cluster, demo cluster. This guy created this cluster. All right. He created this cluster. Now, it means that it is Omero user that will have authority over the cluster. Now, let me now say I have another user called Henry, and I have Rajiv. I have Rajiv user and I have Henry. So these are IAM users. that I want to grant access to my what? My EKS cluster. But let us start the demonstration first. So I'm going to go to my AWS. This is my cluster, demo cluster. Then I have my remote machine. So I have my remote machine down here. So I'll connect to my remote machine. Connected. Now I'm going to say AWS. Okay, before I do that, let's go to IAM, Omero, and create what's it called? And create access key for this user. Create access key. Let's create an access key for this user. Create. Now we have access key and secret key. So I'll copy this guy. So I'll come over here. There was something I didn't show us last time. Alright. So I'll say AWS configure. Right? -- profile. Now I'm setting profile for who? For the Omero user. I'll hit enter. It will ask for the what? Access key. I'll paste it and I'll hit enter. I'll go back to my AWS, copy the secret key, come over here, and I'll paste it. Enter. It will ask for the region. The region is EU West 1. Then the file format is what? JSON. Enter. Now if I run AWS STS get caller identity, I should. Alright. Okay, I know where this thing is coming from. So let me check my .aws credential folder. Okay, this is Omero. Here is Omero. Okay, let's do something. All right. The profile is Omero. Profile is Omero. Record. Okay. Let me check cats.aws configure. I'm coming. What do I have? Profile Omero, profile test, profile default. So this is what I will need to do. Let me remove this file. Remove the .aws file, right? It's deleted. Now let's recreate the credentials. So I'll say AWS configure. Sorry, I'm configuring with the profile, please. -- profile Omero. So I'll copy access key, paste that. Then I'll copy the secret key, paste it. Region is EU West 1. The format is JSON. Now I can say AWS STS gets caller identity. What's this challenge now? Because I have it here now. .aws credential. I have it there. So bam. All right, let me do something else now. Let me remove the profile first. Sorry. Configure. Without the profile, let me go default. All right. Okay, let's go default. Then copy. Let's use the default profile. EU West 1. Then JSON. AWS STS gets caller identity. All right. So with default profile, we are getting this guy. So this guy is now authenticated. So let's check .aws credential. So this is what we have. We have the default profile, right? So that's the default profile. I don't know why it was giving this guy. Maybe the default profile must be existing first. All right, it must be existing before any other credentials can be added. All right, that's okay. Now we need to download the kubeconfig file from what? From our EKS cluster, from the AWS console. So this is what we'll do. Now say AWS EKS updates kubeconfig dash region is EU West 1. The name of the cluster is demo cluster, right? It's demo cluster. So we hit enter. Right. So this guy has been added. So I can now run kubectl get node. Perfect. So now you can see I can run kubectl get node. Now, in as much as the Omero user can authenticate and has authority, he can authenticate and he has authority over this cluster, right? We want to create another IAM user called Henry and see if we can authenticate, or if we can have authority over this cluster that was created by another user. Let's try it and see. So I'll go to IAM. Let me duplicate this page. I'll go to users, create users, and I'll say Henry. Next. Now obviously I want to give this user an admin right, all right, admin privilege. Okay, it's either I give this guy admin privilege or I can add attach policy. But first let's give this guy admin privilege. All right, okay, admin privilege. Next, create. But in production you wouldn't want to give this guy admin privilege, guys. You want to, what you need to do is to, all right, is to what? Add a fine-grained permission. All right, you give this guy the permission that he needs, which should be around EKS, something around EKS cluster. Let me see. EKS. All right, you give this guy EKS cluster policy, I think. Yeah, so that's the policy you give to this guy, the permission, EKS cluster policy. So with this policy he should be able, let's see what he can do. Can create routes, action. All right, these are things that user can do on the cluster. Okay, so yeah, okay, great. So but for the sake of demonstration, let's give the user an admin privilege, which he already has. Okay, so this guy has it. So let's create an IAM credential for this user. So I'll go to security and CLI. Next. Now this Henry user now has access key and secret key. So let's authenticate with the AWS console using the Henry's user details. So I'll copy this guy. I'll come to my terminal. I'll say AWS configure. All right, so this time around I'm going to use the profile because I don't want to override what I have here as default. Look at now, I don't want to override the default profile because anything I do now is going to override the default profile. So I want to set a different profile. All right, so I'll say AWS configure dash profile. The profile is Henry. Profile Henry. All right, so I'll paste the access key, copy the secret key, copy. The region is EU West 1. Output is JSON. Now if I now say AWS STS get caller identity, Okay, this is for Mero. Let me check. I don't know if this will work. Profile. All right, it won't fly. Especially one argument. Profile is okay. Profile will profile Henry. Okay. So guys, this is, we are targeting a profile which is not the default profile. All right. So AWS STS get caller identity, the Henry profile. All right. So this profile is authenticated to my AWS account. Now, if this profile, okay, let's say this profile wants to perform kubectl get node. Now, the profile I'm using now is the Omero profile. Is a user that created the cluster. All right, is a user that created the cluster. Let me do something. All right, let's do something. Now, I want to download the kubeconfig file using what? The Henry's profile. Okay. Let me try. Let me do something. AWS EKS updates kubeconfig -- region is EU West 1. The name is demo cluster -- profile Henry. All right. So I'm using the Henry's profile to download the kubeconfig file. So let's see what happens. All right. So this guy has been updated based on the Henry's profile. Now, if I do kubectl get node. Now that I have updated the kubeconfig file, I have updated the kubeconfig file with this Henry's profile. Look at now. I'm getting this error. You must be logged into the server. You don't have authority. So this is what we are having here now. Initially, this guy is unauthorized. So the Henry user is unauthorized, all right, to do anything on the demo cluster, because he was not the original user that created the cluster. All right. Now, if we try it again, there is no way. But if you do AWS STS get caller identity, by this profile. Okay, let's not confuse ourselves. Let me remove this Omero credential. Let me go to because if I remove it, I won't be able to talk to the cluster. All right, I won't be able to talk to the cluster. Okay, now just know fully well that, just have it at the back of your mind that if the profile, all right, if Harry, who is not authorized to create any resource on this cluster, because he didn't create this cluster, is allowed to download the kubeconfig file. It means that Henry will not be able to perform any operation on the cluster. That's what we have here. So Henry is trying to do a kubectl, and we are having unauthorized access to that cluster. Now, if we try anything we try to do, kubectl get node, it won't go. So this is what I will do. The first thing I will do now is I'm going to download this cluster with Omero's profile, which is the default profile. So I'll come back here, I'll copy that command, I'll paste it. Now this cluster detail has been updated. So this detail is with the Omero user, which is the user that has authority over what the cluster. So if I hit enter, this guy should respond. All right. Now, with this Omero user, I want to grant access. I want to grant access to the Henry user so that Henry will be able to have access to a cluster that he didn't create. So for that, AWS EKS has an object. It has not really an object, but a config map called AWS auth. I showed us last time. So this is a config map. This is the config map that is responsible for authenticating to the AWS EKS cluster. So I'm going to say something. kubectl get config map. The short form for config map is CM. Now, this guy runs in a namespace called kube system. Now, if I try to get resources, if I try to get config map in this namespace, I should see a config map called what? AWS authenticate. In short, it is what? AWS auth. So now, let me get access into this guy by trying to edit this config map. So if I now say kubectl get config map, then the config map name is AWS auth. In what namespace? In the kube system namespace. And I'll hit enter. So I have it, right? So let's try to edit this guy now. So if I now say kubectl edit config map and this guy. So this is what I have. So this detail that you have here is an assume role already. All right, this detail is the detail for what's it called, the EKS worker role. All right, so these are the EKS worker role. So now I'm going to modify this this file. I'm going to modify this object. So what I'll do, I'll come down here. All right, then I'll create a space. Then in the same line with map roles, all right, there's a field called map users. Be careful, make sure that it is in line with map roles. Yeah, that's it. Then I'll say space pipe. So in YAML, when you want to type multiple things, the same thing in multiple lines, what you do is you use a pipe symbol, all right, to instruct the interpreter that this is multiple lines. All right, you want to type multiple lines. So I'll come over here. I'm going to specify the user ARN column. Now the user ARN will be that of Henry. So I'll go back to my IAM, this Henry. So I'll duplicate this tab, so I'll go to users, Henry. Then I will copy the ARN. This is the ARN of Henry, right? I'll copy this guy. I'll come to my terminal. I will paste it. Now the next line will be username. So username will be Henry. The next line is going to be groups. So now what I'm doing now, I'm assigning system role, all right, to the Henry user. So I'll come down and I'll say system column masters. So that's all, guys. That's all I need to do. So if I need to assign another user, I'm going to create something similar like this. So that's all. So all I need to do now is to escape. I will save and quit. So once you save and quit, it will tell you that this guy was what? Edited. So at this juncture, guy, now, all right, remember that if I run this command, Look at it. If I run this command, though now that we have added the Henry user now, Henry should be able to what? To 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 perform cluster operations on the cluster. So I want to download the kubeconfig file based on the Henry's profile. Let me copy it. Let me paste it. If I hit enter, it has been updated with Henry's profile, guys. Now, if I say kubectl get node, this is now working because the Henry user has been what? Added. Kubectl edit. Let me just do it. Kubectl edit config map. The name is AWS auth in namespace cube what system. Now, because this user Henry has been what? Added to what? To the AWS authentication file. So any user that is added here will automatically have access to your EKS cluster. Now, let me go out. Now, let's try something else. You can see, if I say AWS STS get caller identity -- profile of who? Of Henry. I have Henry. Henry is authenticated. Now, let's try again to do something else. Let's create another user called what? Rajiv. So I'll go to my what? To my users. I'll create a user called what? Rajiv. Next, give him admin access. Okay, let's not give him let's give him that EKS cluster policy. Let's give him that cluster policy. This access, all right? Amazon EKS cluster policy. Let's see if this is the right policy. All right. EKS is RDS. EKS cluster policy. Well, let me check EKS cluster policy, blah blah blah, Fargate, local outpost, service policy, service role policy. All right, so let me use this EKS cluster policy. All right, let me assign that policy to Rajiv. I don't want to give Rajiv everything. All right, so here's Rajiv. Rajiv, go to security credentials. Rajiv try to what? Create access key. Create. Now Rajiv wants to authenticate with that access key. Now Rajiv came here and say AWS configure -- profile Rajiv. I'm going to paste, copy, paste, then copy secret key, paste, region EU West 1, then format JSON. All right, now I want to do AWS STS get caller identity -- profile. Profile is what? Rajiv. We have Rajiv authenticated. Now, can Rajiv talk to the cluster? Let's check. So let's download the kubeconfig based on Rajiv profile. Copy this guy based on Rajiv profile. Rajiv. So now look at now. Rajiv don't even have that access. Okay. This is at is not authorized to perform EKS describe cluster on resource. Okay, so now let's increase Rajiv permission. Let's add more permission. Duplicate. Let's add more permission to Rajiv. So I'll go to users, Rajiv. Go to add permission. So I'm going to add service stuff. Attach permissions directly. So I'll come here and say EKS. I saw something service policy. Let me check the service policy. What and what is inside? I'm not seeing a lot here. I'm not seeing a lot. So okay, let me add it though. EKS VPC, EKS worker node policy. Let me see what's inside here. Connector service. Okay, let me check this connector service. Amazon, AWS, SSM. This connector is something else. Connector service role policy. Okay, let me add it. Service policy, service role policy. Let me check service role policy. What was here? I'm looking for what can describe the cluster. Let me add them, sha. And service role for Amazon EKS. I can't see anything related to cluster. All right, let me add this. Let me add permissions. Why now? What happened? What happened? Let me refresh. Service policy. All right, let me go with these two first. Now let's come back to the terminal. Now let's try to authenticate again. We've already authenticated though. If I say AWS STS get caller identity profile Rajiv dash profile, please. All right, so this guy is still there. So now let's copy. Let's try to download the EKS cluster. Copy. Let's run it. Okay, now unauthorized to describe the cluster resource. This. So it's asking for assume role. Okay, so so I'll look at this role type. I'll look at the role type later. EKS cluster policy. Can't describe cluster. Okay, all right. So let me remove this guys. Let me give him an admin role. So remove policies. I'm going to add this user to the group, to the DevOps group. I'm going to add it to the group. So I'll go to groups, DevOps group. Then I'll add a user. Then I'll add Rajiv. Add. So Rajiv has been added to the DevOps group. So Rajiv has access now. He has access to everything now. So Rajiv can run this command, which is this. All right. So if I hit enter, all right, it will sync. It will sync. Just wait, guys. It will sync. All right. So it has synced now. Okay. It needed some time to sync. So Rajiv has been able to update the cluster. All right. So now, based on Rajiv's profile, if I say kubectl get node, I won't be able to get any node. You tell me that unauthorized access. You must be logged into the server to perform this action, this operation. So for that, I'm going to switch back to the default user, or I'll switch back to Henry. Henry has access. So I'll say what? I'll say Henry. I'm using Henry's profile. Now, Henry can now do what? kubectl get what? Get node. kubectl gets node. You can see now, because Henry has been added to the AWS authentication what? File. So I'll do the same thing. So I'll now say kubectl edit config map aws underscore auth in namespace cube what cube system. So now I'm going to do similar thing again. I'm going to add this same user. I'll come down here, I'll go over here, I'll say user and column. The user and will be Rajiv. So I'll click on Rajiv, and copy Rajiv ARN. This Rajiv ARN. Come to my terminal, I'll paste it there. Great. And I'll hit enter. The username is what? Is Rajiv. I'll hit enter. Then the groups, I need to add this Rajiv to. I'll add it to the system masters group. That's all. Escape, save and quit. It was edited. Now if I try to download the kubectl file with Rajiv's profile, let's see what happens. So copy this guy, copy it and paste and hit enter. Updated. So this guy now has been updated with what? Rajiv profile. So if I try to do kubectl get node, you should see that Rajiv can now what? Run kubectl command against your EKS cluster. So far so good, guys. So this is one way, all right, of granting permission to IAM identities, all right, to IAM principal, to IAM users to have access to your cluster. These were users that did not create the cluster, because we know very well that AWS only grants access to whosoever created the cluster. Anybody who doesn't create the cluster will not have access to the cluster. But there is a way we could what? Grant access to what? To the cluster for those users. And that way is by modifying the AWS auth config map. So at this juncture, guys, is there any query? All right. So since there's no query, is there any query? I'm going to end this session, and I'll continue with the other aspect of what we have today. All right, great. So let me stop this guy. Let me stop